This is the internet court of truth and lies, where if you have something that you think is true and you wonder whether other people think it's true, or you have something that you think is a lie and you wonder whether others think it's a lie too, then you could find out. Often in these trials, at least one person points out something that the plaintiff who's taking the case into the trial had thought of. Today, what we're going to do a trial, a piece of work that I did when I first got into what I call Mendaciology, which is the computational cognitive science of lies, of human lies. And what I had noticed was that there was virtually no literature on Mendaciology. There was virtually no literature that was high quality scientific literature on this, or scholarly literature. Probably one of the best papers I found dated from the 1300s, which was weird. It's in my book. The one of the things I had noticed was that lies had no taxonomy. In other words, there was not a formal way to classify lies and thereby classify deviations from the truth that had to do with lies. This paper partially shows you that taxonomy, and I'll describe it to you in a second, but this is basically what this paper is about. The case I'm trying is true that teaching Mendaciology in schools and schooling situations is important. Part of this is both from computational cognitive science, from what we've learned in 50 years in what used to be called the organization of memory. Before that, it was called verbal learning and memory. When I got my PhD in this, the PhD was in verbal learning and memory, and already the organization of memory was at that point in time taking over because we wanted to include vision and other types of memories. The way brains work is what's called activation levels among over 100 billion neurons, with synapses, or trillions and trillions of compute points. And when people process the simplest of things, like a sentence, this article argues for teaching media lie schooling, that sentence, for everybody who listened to the sentence and felt like they didn't think it was incomprehensible, you were burning about 90 million compute points in parallel while the sentence was being said. And they concluded about 2 seconds after the sentence was said. In other words, your brain said, this is okay. May not remember it, but this is okay. There is a trace of what it remembers, but it may not remember the exact words. And definitely tomorrow, unless you decide to remember it, you're not going to remember it. It turns out that we all share essentially the same organizational mechanisms for all the content in our brains. Everything from how we see and recognize a finger to whole books that we read or movies that we saw or interactions that we had with anybody. The brain organizes things in terms of these events. The brain, this incredibly massive parallel compute engine, organizes content pretty much in the same way. So we know things like there are areas of the brain that are associated with recognizing faces, people's faces. But it goes a lot deeper than that. We could take sentences with similar meanings and see that they're lighting up similar areas in the brain. And we can take a different language, say the sentence in a different language, or somebody who's never, for example, experienced English, or has any knowledge of English, and the same sentence translated into their language will light up the same areas in their brain, which is really spooky. These are massive areas where, when I say massive, you need to realize that I'm talking sub-millimeter cubes of neurons that are smaller than a cubic millimeter, because lots and lots of neurons exist in that space. And so when we see a sentence lighting up the brain, we estimate roughly for any given sentence, it'll light up about a cubic centimeter of your brain cells, which is a lot. That's where the 90 million comes from, and the 3,000 connections that are made by a single neuron to 3,000 other neurons, essentially. And the compute points are in the connections, or in the synapses. Now, we know that there are some exceptions to that. We know that there are some things that are not quite synapses. Every cell, whether it's a vegetable cell or an animal cell, has what are called ion channels through which communication takes place. For example, if you look at a leaf, there'll be a left side and a right side of the leaf that will be symmetric bilaterally. That's happening because of communication through the essentially networks of communication inside of vegetables. And we know that neurons have that, for example, a synapse, essentially a highly evolved ion channel. And we know that neurons can communicate with each other with ion channels that are not just synapses, but they behave that way. They behave in the sense that they're sending electromagnetic signals to each other. The thing to realize is how really impressive the human brain is, and how much of your waking hours is spent in computing things you are completely unaware of. I've said in some other articles that Freud was right, and there's a unconscious computation going on. He unbelievably underestimated the amount of unconscious computation. One of the areas of study allows you to see that computation, if you've learned to see it, learn to observe it, is Mendaciology, lying, deceit. Because there you're trying to see something that's deceptive, that's trying to deceive. That requires a lot of background processing that immediately recognizes, oh, that's not the truth. That's a lie. Around that, we have a way of categorizing all lies. It turns out that the activation mechanisms are such that the only way you can really affect what your brain is going to conjure up is to talk in natural language to people. If people talk to each other, they will correct understanding of sentences when needed. They'll detect that somebody didn't understand them, or they need to ask them a question or whatever. What's missing in standard social media is what I call fiat lying, which is just people saying things out into the ether without anybody responding, other than that they got some gratification screaming, and other people may have heard them, but there's nothing like what we know of as argument, which is where you can actually learn a little bit about how other people are taking things, and thereby become smarter in how you detect, deal with deceit, and deal with truth. So the first principle is what's called enforced moderated dialogue, which is it really doesn't matter the specific questions that are asked and the answers that are given, as long as there's a structure to it. And the structure reaches into the underlying semantics of a truth or a lie. So you can have a standard set of questions. People will answer the pieces of the questions that they want to answer and not answer the other pieces, but they don't go off topic. They don't go off into wild spaces declaring that somebody is nasty. That's one thing. The second thing is that this affords a way to create a taxonomy of for every sentence spoken on Earth at any given time t, which you can put those sentences into a taxonomy based on Mendaciology, based on truth and lies. And so this article is about that. The first thing it says is that teaching Mendaciology in schools and schooling situations is important. And the reason it's important is it really didn't matter what the verdicts were. It doesn't matter that they're relevant, but it doesn't matter specifics of a question, because people will come in and correct each other based on something. The questions are really to provide a sort of a skeletal framework by which people can make their own judgments or dissect a truth or a lie. It does matter that from a scientific point of view, that what happens is we are now able to classify any spoken lie or any spoken truth, which is basically unheard of. There is no, to my knowledge, classification system for truth and lies until this came along. This is the classification system, and it differentiates what I call folk lies, which are lies that are spoken of. When a lie is brought to truth court, it becomes a folk lie, and people can dissect it. But the really damaging lies are often fiat lies, where for any reason whatsoever, a lie is out there and you might believe it, or it might generate some thoughts that you don't even know you're having. That is your views of other things. Those are fiat lies because you can't openly talk about something being a lie. The conversation is not about dissecting whether one sentence was a lie or truth. We derived this classification scheme based in linguistics. Most of y'all know what the common meaning of presupposition is. All lies have certain presuppositions, and one is whether the lie is factually true or untrue. Another one is, was there a deceit? So it can be factually true. It might not be the whole truth, in which case there could be a deceit. So I'm pointing that out on the screen. Is the deceit intended? Yes or no? It could be that the person who's speaking the lie just heard it from somebody, or for a variety of reasons believes it's the truth. And so he doesn't really intend it to be a lie. In other words, the person is just repeating something. In fact, he's actually being a pawn of somebody else deceiving. And then there's the question, which is a key presupposition behind all lies and deceit, is what's the motivation behind it? Or why did the person try to deceive you? What's the motivation behind the original sentence that the person may not have intended to as a lie, but somebody who told him that had a motivation that was to deceive you, and so you can be deceived. The motivation feeds into what's called social acceptability. If the motivation is evil, one of the things that human brains, probably all animal brains do, is they distinguish between good and bad, and truth and lies are very high level opposites. By high level, it does not mean abstract. It means they are pervasive. So virtually everything that you see or hear or say, you have a very quick response as to whether or not what you're describing is good or bad. And you also have a very quick response as to whether what you're saying is true. Or this folk lie thing is taking what could be a fiat lie and dissecting it with a set of questions. If the lie or truth is successfully dissected, or successfully for the person dissected, then the deceit, if there is one, will fail. And we know that. So we know that we've done the experiments. We know that if you know something that somebody is lying and he's got a specific motivation with a specific deceit in mind, um, you will not be deceived. You'll simply understand it that way, and everything will be fine. Your brain will not be heavily motivated to do conspiracy theories or any of these other things. If you go down to it, it says, is it factually true? Answer that question, then is it not the whole truth? If it's not the whole truth, in other words, it is factually true, it is the whole truth, it's not a lie. So you have three outputs of the decision network. But what's important is the decision network itself is a classifier. So if when we do taxonomies of animals, for example, a biologist will have a classifier to decide what kind of lizard this is. And they'll ask a set of questions. And if those questions come out a certain way, it'll be this kind of a lizard, or it might be an amphibian. This in the taxonomy, in the global taxonomy of animals. And same goes for vegetables. So you create taxonomies with a decision network, and this is the proposed decision network. If you hear something and it's a lie, but it's not suspected at all to be a lie, the deceit will succeed. And that's what we're trying to avoid in people learning how other people think. They will suspect lies that they might not otherwise suspect and pulled into the deceit, which can actually change the way they think about other people or the way they think about the world and so forth and so on. The crazy thing about all of this is it's completely language independent. There are words for all these things, every language, and I just want to be careful. In Eskimo, there's 24 words for white. So there are words in different languages, and sometimes there are many words for the same thing in one language, only a few words for that thing in another language. But there are core word concepts that are true word concepts in any language. And this taxonomy is all about that. So what we're arguing is that this would be a great thing to teach, and is a great way to teach it because you can actually see it. And so that's my argument. I'm going to go through my answer. So my answer is the truth. I said yes. Is it the whole truth? I don't know. The case I made needs a lot more information than that provided. So I just don't. But I've been working hard on this since around 2018 when I first decided to study lies as a scientist. And that's when I found out, oh my God, there's not a lot of published literature here. Is it nothing but the truth? I see no way that this is not the truth. What's the deceit? This is something that I believe is true, so there was no deceit. And it came out of my own brain. Is the deceit or truth intended? Yes, the truth is intended. Opportunity for getting sponsors that are not funding schools to do things like this, but rather sponsors that want to create a curriculum in Mendaciology for schools. That kind of thing would be available money. For example, Pew is a nonprofit that could well want to fund work on this. What's the social acceptability of the truth or lie? I think that this is a proof education is socially acceptable, even if society does not accept this suggestion. We've seen that when we were originally named this thing, we were called the Internet Court of Lies. And that shut down the brains of about 30% of the people. In other words, they wanted to have nothing to do and not think about or even have a conversation about anything with the word lie in it. It was amazing. It was just amazing. 1 in 3 people will say, what is this? Why are we even talking about it? What label would improve the social acceptability of the truth or lie? no label because that was just my opinion on it. So let's go through the people on this and see what y'all have to say. So juror one, a 30, 40-second summary of your verdicts.
Sure. Mainly, I might have changed a little bit whenever I listened to your lecture, but I originally said this is a great idea. One of the biggest problems with defining lies is that there are so many definitions of things that you pointed out, too many labels, too many variation, and it confuses everything. We need to go back more to basics, actually, and go back to UG, you, me, and body language. And that would mean a whole lot. But I think that this would be greatly interesting. Agree with you.
Yeah, I think that high school textbooks should have a chapter. I'm not trying to think of what high school course this would fit into.
Sociology.
Sociology, yeah. Sociology would work. Of course, I'm a hard scientist, but they don't teach experimental psychology in high schools. So
that's what my son took in college, experimental psychology. I thought, what are you going to use that for? But he does use it.
I use it. That's my PhD, experimental psychology, verbal learning and memory. And it was on conspiracy theories.
Oh, great.
Let me go to juror two.
Hey, that's me. This is great for a 401 philosophy course, but the biggest problem is that it continues to complicate the concept of lie. A lie requires deceit. Something that is false does not require deceit. It's just something that's not factually accurate. So as you broaden the definition of lie, you're not actually making this more accessible. You're complicating it and creating an academic subject out of it that's far more expansive than anybody short of a junior or senior in college is prepared to take control of. So the topic you're discussing here is critical thinking. It's a subset of critical thinking. And I'd agree that critical thinking should absolutely be taught at all levels of education. But complicating the concept of lie unnecessarily does not further critical thinking. It may be nice for taxonomy, but taxonomy, again, is a junior or senior level course in philosophy, sociology, something like that.
This is not, by the way, this is not philosophy. So this is science. And I have my son-in-law is a faculty in the University of Nebraska, tenured professor in the philosophy department. And this is not philosophy.
I mean, you can call it whatever you want to, but it's not. There's ones and zeros here with regard to.
There are ones and zeros. We just don't know it yet.
So that means there aren't at this time ones and zeros.
No, I'll give you an example with deceit. So with deceit, the question is whether or not a factually untrue thing had a deceit underlying it. Okay.
Yes.
And the fact is that if it's a fiat lie, or if the person who's telling it did not intend to deceive you, he thought it was true, then from a philosophical point of view, it has no deceit, but it is
a lie.
Ah, yes, it can actually point you. Yes.
Can you use a real world example? Because I can use a real world example to the contrary.
So if I say that Trump lost the election of 2020, and I say it because I heard it from somebody, and you think that's not true, it's actually untrue, but I believe it is true. I believe there's no deceit, but I heard it from somebody. And the deceit is really in that other person I heard it from. It's not from me. I just said it. So there's a problem. Is there a deceit? The answer could be no, in which case the classification goes an unintended deceit.
But it's not an unintended deceit. It's just a falsehood.
No,
it's something that's false.
It's factually untrue, but is there a deceit? The answer is no, meaning it's true, right?
But you can't have deceit without intent. That's one of the underlying problems with the definition.
No, this is the reason that this graph doesn't have options.
To go off into nothing. What do you mean?
Arrow here going to the left, arrow there going to the left, arrow there going out to nulls.
Yes.
You can't do it. It's not permitted.
Oh, it's not
You have
permitted in the graph, but in reality,
no, it's not. It's
I
a
think it
decision
absolutely
network.
is.
No, sir. It's a decision network.
Call it a decision network, call it a decision tree, call it a flow chart.
But the decision network doesn't have an option if it's a taxonomy.
Okay. So you see how far off into semantics we are at this point? All because the definition of lie, when we remove deceit from it, now we have to get off into semantics. And we're expecting that elementary school kids will accept this premise, that an educational system will be able to take something like this and simplify it without the
So
necessary.
I'm actually
complicated
not
factors.
talking about elementary school, but I am talking about the people understanding that, for example, they may be hearing a whole bunch of lies from very trusted people who just don't know that they're lies. They're hearing what those people think are truths. Okay.
Yes.
And those are still lies.
So
The repetition of a lie is a lie.
that's what you're saying.
The repetition of the unintended repetition of a lie that was originally a lie is still a lie.
Even without the intent of the second speaker.
Yes, because it's still a lie, and everybody would accept that, I think.
No, because that assumes intent. If they don't have the intent to deceive, they're just promulgating misinformation. It's wrong, it's false, but there's no intent to deceive. So without intent to deceive, the unintentional deceit definition of lie just complicates matters.
Yep. So we don't have the time.
Sweet, thanks.
Be here in the fall. He's on what do they call it? A sabbatical from his job. Let's see, juror 3.
That's me, Bob. Yeah, look, I agree with what you're saying to a certain degree that it should be taught in schools. But after hearing the other jurors, look, it's a complicated taxonomy. And I do understand that we need to be educated on how to detect lies and non-truths. But I do agree with Ryan, emanates from intention to deceive. Right? So if, here's an example, right? If I tell my 5-year-old son that the earth is flat, and he goes and tells his 5-year-old friend that the earth is flat. I know the earth is not flat, and I just told him the earth is flat. I lied to him. He tells his friend, 5 years old, that the earth is flat. There's no intention to. So if I look at your taxonomy, I just want to understand. So
that would be an unintended deceit. The way it would be classified, it is a lie, but it is an unintended lie because the deceit is unintended.
Like manslaughter.
Like manslaughter, yep. Absolutely.
Okay. Is there a taxonomy for the truth?
So the answer is yes. And it's taught already in logic.
Okay. And it comes naturally to human beings, am I right?
And lies come naturally to humans, just as truth does. We're truth engines. Our brains are truth engines. And deceit is something we try to avoid. If we already have classes in truth, it's called logic, formal logic. And it's been around for 2,500 years.
Mm.
And you can create taxonomies from the decision trees.
But it hasn't been very effective because lies still exist.
That's because people are very conniving. And they know how, they understand these basics. They understand that they can get away with deceit. But it's harder for them to get away with when structured dialogue is required, because then people question it. I'm trying to tell the truth, but I'm a poor scientist trying to tell the truth. And I'm doing the best I can, but I might be wrong in some sense. I have no idea.
If you're deceiving us.
Yeah, if I'm wrong, I'm deceiving you. But I'm pretty sure that from a linguistic point of view, until I hit social acceptability, this is all associated with presuppositions and linguistics, which the scholarly structural linguistics is a science, by the way. There is a subset of linguistics that's true science. And there's a huge literature on how languages compare with each other, what are the linguistic universals, and all this other stuff. So, juror 4?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I think that's me. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot I like to say. One of the things that I find just so delightful in syllogistic logic is the idea that a false proposition implies any proposition. But what I
That's not
see is
true.
people have lies, and then lies build upon lies and create lies. And it's just people fill up with the wrong stuff in their heads. And a lot of it is unintended, but the false logic of a lie creates all sorts of other lies. It's very much a mesh, a network, which
So
is hard to pick up, which is why I think Truth Court is so good.
I was going to
But
point out that if you want to read one of the best articles I've ever seen on the variety of lies that are not scientifically based, but are philosophically based, look up on Wikipedia fallacies. And there you'll get hundreds of types of fallacies. And they are really interesting to read about because they try to put some structure to it, which they can't really do. It shows you the breadth of the human brain. And
that's just underlining what I'm saying is that we're full of this
right.
mesh and network of stuff. But anyway, which is why I do think that it's very good to start early in schools, as you say. But I wouldn't call it the science of Mendaciology. It needs some other kind of word. It needs some other way of expressing. You put that in schools and kids will just run a mile from the science of.
Yeah,
it needs something else, some other kind of selling point to make it for schools.
I was saying that it was really high school and it might be in some textbook. Okay.
Yeah.
But and it might be in a psychology textbook, experimental psychology textbook, which there are high school textbooks in, but there are virtually no courses.
But is it the case
thing.
that high schools still have debating societies like they used to?
Yes, and
So
rhetoric
this would be
is
a perfect adjunct to a debating
absolutely
society.
the thing that this is closest to is rhetoric, where you're permitted to lie to make a case. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't bring in ethics and morality and logic. But rhetoric does give you the container that you could put deceit into. But yeah, teaching rhetoric would be great. But it needs to be taught not from the point of view of the way they do it today, which is they stand and then try to convince people of something that's, you get two people and have opposite things, and then they each try to argue with each other.
No, I
That's
agree.
not
Exactly.
really.
I mean, the structured truth court is great for the classroom. Yeah, like that. Yeah.
So juror 5.
I'll just keep it quick. I agreed with mostly on all of it, and I really agree with what Teresa and Brian have said. I really think it does need to be discussed in school because the way the world is today, you never know who's telling the truth and who's not, to be honest. So it's good to get a head start on learning things like that. And also to teach body language mixed in with that would be a key factor, I believe, as well.
Yeah, body language is part of speech. So in my world, natural language includes body language. It's associated with what's called the prosody. A lot of the prosody of speech are linguistic universals that don't matter what language you speak. You know, waving your hand can mean pretty much the same thing, or raising your eyebrows or whatever, no matter what language you speak. In my world, there's a good literature, very good literature on with your body language, your face, and all this other stuff being what's being said, not just an adjunct to being said. But juror 6.
I would say that I do agree with you when you say that it needs to be like taught in schools from like an early age onwards. I think it would help kids develop that skill for critical thinking and things like that. But I think Andrew said something about you can't have it as a core subject because it's gonna scare the kids away, because having that full name there, it's to kids, it's gonna be a big word, and comprehension at that age isn't really the best. And I feel if you could incorporate that into a main subject and then have that as a underlying topic within the syllabus, I think that would be better than including this as a subject on its own, because obviously it's going to scare the kids.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I'm not going to be the one to do any of that. I'll be dead before that. get around to that one. I've written books and written chapters and all these other things in my life and gone through with editors and so forth and so on. And I don't do that anymore. So all I do is right now what I'm doing, which is what we're doing is put software as a service on the web that illustrates the nature of structured dialogue that might well assist in people becoming more sensitive to disinformation, misinformation, and more sensitive to truth. Tier 7.
Hi, everyone. So my summary was done from the standpoint of should Mendaciology be taught in schools for the purposes of identifying media lies? And for me, that's an easy yes. I said, in an age saturated with misinformation, deepfakes, algorithmic manipulation, and agenda-driven news, it is crucial for learners to understand how lies are constructed, delivered, and normalized within the media. Teaching Mendaciology equips young minds with the analytical tools to detect propaganda, bias, and media manipulation.
Yep. So, Juror 8.
I think I'm inclined to agree with what Juror 6 said, and Brian as well. I think he said, if you can find a way to incorporate it, like, efficiently, and I know you said that's not something for you to worry about, but
I'm not going to do it. I won't. That will take a lot of work. Somebody who is young, who is working on making a name for himself and having topics for textbooks and so forth and so on, will or will not do this, and they will or will not pick up on this. So you just never know. And that's the reason I said that it could be a section or a chapter. I doubt if it's a book. It's a piece of another subject.
Yeah.
And in fact, if I were to pick a course I would personally want it in, it would be in logic. It would be an advanced course in logic called Mendaciology. Crucially depends on logic. It's logic tells you how truth works. Mendaciology tells you how deceit works. That's my trial. If you're looking to try to get sponsors, you could do a GoFundMe on this thing that basically said, let's develop a curriculum and maybe not use the words, just whatever you want to do. But the absence of a written literature here is stunning. It actually completely surprised me. Normally, when I get interested in a new subject, I find a large literature, and I could find no literature. There's this one book that we had another trial on, Deception, which was a great book with examples, historical examples of deception and broken into categories and so forth and so on. But it was a rare find. And you don't see people, except at very shallow levels. If I had a PhD student come into my office and say he wanted to do his dissertation on lies, my instant response would be go find another dissertation topic. You will destroy your career. Guaranteed. Because the word will get out that you're promoting lies. Nobody will get past that. But I think the reason that there's virtually no literature is it's just not rewarded. People don't want to hear about it. On the other hand, Brian may be completely right, and this is not being put in the right frame. The other thing that I want to say is the only really good literature that dances around this and does it very thoroughly is the legal literature. So the legal theory literature is some of the finest literature on deceit. And it's beautiful literature. It's just not on the science. It's not on the philosophy. It's on the legal aspects of things.
See, that's where I think we could actually get better input from you is with regard to how we see the physiological act of lying occur. Because lie detectors are BS. They're nothing. But if you could actually talk about here's the section of the brain or here's what neurons fire in your eye looks like.
Everybody in my area who's a real scientist agrees you will not do this physiologically. That's
really?
that's just a hopeless thing, because I can lie to you and everything I can say is a lie and I don't know it. I think it's all true.
That gets back into intent,
That's the reason
which
we
means
have
it's not a
intent.
lie
Well,
because you won't have a
that's your,
physiological reaction.
so the definition of a lie in my book is anything anybody will call a lie. And so if you just simply call something a lie, whether it was intentional or not, it's a lie. This is behavioral psychology. We look at what people actually do.
Yeah.
We don't care about philosophy. We're not philosophers. We measure what they do, and that's what we do, and we predict what they do, but we don't do philosophy.
But you're saying then that falsehood is unquantifiable.
So is
You
truth.
can't quantify a physiological response or physiological act.
No, we don't believe that. There's not I know of nobody who's really good in my area who will say that you can, in certain contexts, do some physiological things and find out that something's a lie. But if the person actually completely believes it's the truth and isn't, it's just, and by the way, one of the easiest ways to beat a lie detector is convince yourself that the lie that you're telling is the truth. And then you'll beat the lie detector. It's crazy.
Here's the secret about those. The lie detector isn't the machine, it's the person sitting across the table from you.
And you'll beat that person.